Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 155 of Retro Power Uncut. And you find me between a brace of Octane Allegros or Honda Integras, one or the other anyway. We are reporting from the fabrication shop again, and we'll have a little update on the second Octane Allegro. Obviously, this is the first one. See where that stages that one's at. We're trying to get the second car to roughly the same stage as the first one, so that we've completed all the structural metalwork. That means we free up a jig bench, and it also means that we can keep the jobs as efficient as possible by trying to do them in sequence on both cars, so that we're just duplicating the parts as we go. To that end, Bobby has been pushing forward with the fabrication on this again this week and has made serious progress. The boot, I'm just looking at it now, the rear boot floor has been terminated to the boot lid shut, if you like, the boot shut across the bottom. I think last week we had literally just mated the body shell onto the top of the floor pan. And that left all the sort of edge finishing to do and the closing of gaps around the areas where the actual sort of joint was made. And one of those gaps was the rear of the boot floor. There's a sort of a 60 or 70 mil section across the back of the boot with an upwards flange on it, which then we spot weld to the forward side of the seal channel on the boot aperture. So that's all done. Bobby's finished all that. Before he did that, he finished extending the Integra chassis rails, if you like, the rails that go under the boot floor that originally had the lashing points on and the rear bumper mounts on the Integra, not the bumper mounts, I think they were the rear towing points actually. He's extended those from their sort of cut-off state and mated them to the front side of the Allegro rear valance, where the Allegro bumper mounts are. He's put a reinforcing plate on the inside of that and then mated the rear of the rails on the Integra onto the back of those plates, same as we do on this car obviously. Then he's got the rear of the boot floor all closed in. He's finished the fabrication work on the A-pillars, inners and outers, got all that finished. And then the drains, which we mentioned previously, there's two sort of square tubes, if you like, fabricated in steel that take the water from the ends of the scuttle area, this area here, and drain it outside, under the outer wings on the outside of the A-pillars. They have to be fully welded, obviously, so no water can run through anywhere. Note that's now done, that's fully welded. The outer A-pillar closing panels have now been fitted, following the fitment of the reinforcers that go inside them. Again, I think last week I mentioned those reinforcers. Well, they're now spot welded in place, and then the A-pillar outers are welded on, all spot welded in place. And then the drains put through, and as I say, continuous welded around the outside. So now all the rainwater that runs into here goes into the air intake here, runs across to the two sides. That all drains by gravity out to the sides, then runs out through those drains and out and ends up under the wings on the outside there. So that's all done. He's got the doors on, check the fit of the doors, tweak the sills a little bit to get the door fit to sills, because we can't fit the sills until we fit the shell. So in terms of the final height tweaking of the sill to door, that had to be improved, tweaked slightly following refitment of the doors, which obviously couldn't be done while we were fitting the shell. So doors are on, and he's then checked the fitment of the sills and got that pretty damn good now. That's very, very close. Probably close enough to be left as it is now. That's very good. So then the next phase was fitting up the front end so that we can fit the front panel. To that end, Bobby's got the front wings bolted on and aligned, got them aligned to the doors, made sure that the shut lines are all good there, tried the bonnet on, made sure that the bonnet alignment's all good, temporarily screwed on the wings, made some temporary brackets out of some bits of old scrap aluminium. He's made some brackets that go up the sides, picking up off existing bolt holes on the inner wings, and then screwed the wings to those, just to hold them temporarily in place, so that he could then line up the front panel. He's then lined up the front panel, temporarily bolted that onto the front of the rails with some temporary brackets that are just tacked on in place, so everything can be aligned and realigned and realigned and realigned with all the various processes that have got to go on to repeatable positions. And then this morning, he's just started carrying on where I left off, I would say, but I mean, I'd really only made a very, very, very rudimentary start of putting a bit of a curve in a bit of tube, but he's now picking up this extra piece of fabrication on the front. We've decided that we're so pushed for space with the main engine cooling radiator, the air conditioning condenser and the fans, which both will require. We can't fit the fans on the back, or certainly we can't fit a fan on the back of the AC condenser. So we've decided to move the fans to the front where we can fit them, and it's not going to put the fan in a dangerously hot position by the exhaust manifold. But we need some more space, and we're going to have to eat up a little bit of the front panel, and to do that we've got to cut out the front panel inner, and to do that will mean weakening it quite a bit. So we're adding a little bit of structure under here which will actually carry the two cooler packs, well, I say cooler packs, the radiator and the condenser and their respective fans, and also provide a lower mounting for the valance. And also a very validly raised point by Cal was that we need to split the lower seam on the valance anyway, because there's inherently some trapped corrosion in there on a car of this age. Even though they're in very good condition, there's bound to be a bit of trapped corrosion, and we can't really prepare that area. So we're going to split that seam so we've just got the outer valance, and then Bobby's going to make some brackets on this tube that the outer valance will then attach to, so that there's no trapped sheet metal seam there anymore. It's just attached to the tube, and so then the tube will have the brackets for the radiator and the AC condenser, and also a stay bar that goes up probably between them or next to one of them. It was a bit of jiggling around to make it actually fit, but basically there'll be a stay bar going down to this, which also steadies the bonnet latch point of the slam panel, because there's a little pressed panel in the middle of there normally behind the front grille, and we've got to get rid of that because that panel's too deep. So we're going to put a stay down that carries that front panel and steadies that. So yeah, all that's to be done. But yeah, things are moving forward pretty rapidly on the Allegro front, and yeah, it's all coming together nicely. We've got a couple of little rot repairs to do on the screen apertures, and yeah, ploughing on with the fabrication on the front. And then it's into all of the other work that has been done on this in terms of the bonnet hinges, the outer wing mounting rails have got to be done, and then all the seatbelt anchorages, and on and on and on, a number of other tasks. But yeah, it's coming together very nicely. In the background then we're going to start getting the running gear plans ready to go, so we're getting things in sequence there as well, so we've got all the running gear ready in the background while we're getting the body shell fabrication done. I'll let Cal mention the bodywork because things are moving forward there, and we're ready for the next steps on that now. They're underway, so I'll let Cal pick that one up. Wait for the bang. Following Jamie's descent from his upper echelons, we'll move on to the E-Type. Now, it's been a bit of a fragmented week in terms of manpower in the fabrication workshop. Stu has been on holiday and came back yesterday, and Sam's been off ill, and Tom is off ill. So we've had a somewhat reduced workforce this week, so the progress on other things has been a little bit slower and less, but there has been some progress nonetheless. Sam's working now on carrying on with the seat mountings in the E-Type. He's pretty much got the seat mounting boxes done and fitted to the tunnel. So he's working on the bracketry to mount the seats to those, and then also working on cutting the apertures into the tunnel top either side of the seat. I don't quite know where that's at, to be honest. I'm not quite sure because I've not appraised myself. Yeah, he's going to be working on getting the cutouts done for the back of the seat to allow that to sit into the tunnel top and get the bracketry done. So yeah, progress on all fronts here, getting the seats in. But yeah, obviously limited progress this week. With the usual schools return to school sickness bugs doing the rounds. Everybody's getting caught by them. So yeah, that's where we're at on E-Type. There'll be a brief dwelling on that. Moving on to Redux E30. Scott's been working on this, and as you can see, there's progress occurring. The carbon panel mock-up is continuing and looking pretty good. There's, as always, there's some tweaking, there's some working backwards and forwards, just making sure that everything fits correctly, getting everything clamped in place, and there's a lot of clamping and unclamping, fitting and unfitting. repeating and just trialing things, making sure that everything's aligned correctly, because at the point the glue goes on and these pieces are bonded in place, obviously it's done. You can't move. There's no going back at that point. So we've got to just make sure everything fits perfectly and get all the alignment done at the start. And all the alignment going on at the moment is, I think, as I alluded to last week, really with the aim of A, making the panels fit, but B, getting the rear outer halves of the inner arch tubs fabricated. So we refabricate those to allow for the extra track width, and that has to be done to match the inside of the quarter panels once they're fitted, and they have to be fitted before that position can be exactly determined. So that's what's going on at the moment, but we can't determine the quarter panel fitting position perfectly without also determining the door fitting positions perfectly, and the wings and the roof and everything else that all fits, everything has to fit together. So that's all being worked on at the moment, just to make sure that everything's correct prior to the building of the arch tubs. But yeah, it's looking really good. It's everything's fitting as it should. There've been no horrible surprises. There shouldn't be, you know. We would expect there not to be horrible surprises, but we're also very used to getting them, as you'll have seen from the various issues we're having on the assembly side of things. You can never predict where the next horrible surprise is going to come from. And then moving on again, over to Project Churchill. Stu's back from his holes, which looked very nice, and he had some uncharacteristically sunny weather up on Orkney, which was very nice. And we got some lovely blue sky pictures up there this time, which is not rain. I think he's had a very pleasant time, so it's good. He's back into exhaust fab as well, which is possibly the just show us that piece. If you've not got, he's got it halfway in now. He's trying to get it out at the moment. Yeah, basically he's doing the over axle. Stu's making the over axle bend sections at the moment, which are like one of those puzzles at the fairground where you have a loop of wire and you've got to run it down the other loop of wire without touching it. It's quite challenging to thread in and out of the rear subframe to get a pair of 2-inch systems through the rear subframe and around the brakes and around the drive shafts and with the V-bands. Oh, was it 2 1/4? Sorry, 2 1/4 inch. A pair of 2 1/4 inch diameter exhaust systems through that space and still have sufficient clearance on the drive shafts, clearance on the subframe, make sure we get no rattles, everything else. It's quite a challenge. I don't think you could get any more through there. And Stu's just working out the correct path to get that pipe in and out, which it looks like he's having a bit of a challenge with. It was out earlier, so he knows it does fit. Yeah, the challenge is now we've got a camera on him, he's got it stuck. But yeah, that's all progress being made on the final parts of the exhaust system, which, as I say, have been paused a little bit for holiday. As I say, now Tom's away because Tom's off poorly at the moment. It's given Stu the chance to work with the car up in the air for a bit and finally get the exhaust system finished off. So once Stu's done that, then I think it'll be either Stu or Tom, either or, continuing on with the lead work. And that's really the next major sort of hurdle is getting all the lead work complete. And that's the next stage, because the exhaust system's looking pretty close to done if Stu can get the pipe unwoven from the back. But yeah, that's all coming together quite well. And then the final thing this week, which I'll leave you with, is the second stage of paintwork on the MK1 Escort is now complete. So I'll leave you with Jamie's footage of that in progress. But yeah, we now have the two-tone part of the paint finish done, and the next phase really is getting the pinstripes applied. And yeah, that's the next phase, and we're actually trying to get hold of somebody to do that pinstriping. Very sadly, the guy who we have used for many years for hand pinstriping and any hand brush paintwork on vehicles died a while back, and we don't actually know of anybody else to do that work. So we're currently speaking to a number of people we know that will probably know somebody to use for that, but that's not a settled thing at the moment. It's very unfortunate that our previous chap passed away, because his work was absolutely superb. He'd done quite a number of vehicles for us, and it was absolutely superb. Really, really lovely guy. So I think on that note, I'll leave you with a bit of footage of some paintwork occurring on the MK1 Escort, and hand over to Cal.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel. We're going to start in here, quite unusually, and I'm going to start with this. So I have a letter here and some chargers, which were very generously given to me by Paul Holland of Energy Solutions. And basically they're a Victron Energy trickle charger with like a quick connect system, so you can have a socket on the car that's permanently on there, so you can plug them in and keep them on trickle charge when you're not using them. Much like the usual go-to CTEC charger system. But I have to say, these look pretty darn good. So thank you very much, Paul. And if anybody wants to get a decent trickle charger, then this is probably the place to go, Energy Solutions. Right, moving on, I have some very nice billet parts here. So there's actually a duplicate set of those still in bubble wrap over there. These are the tanks for the MK1 Escort projects. So this one is the screen wash fill tank. So that goes on one side of the bulkhead. It's kind of wedge shaped because we've done it so that the top is level, and because of the bulkhead there isn't. It's retained with M6, I think they are, bolts in the bottom here from underneath. And then also a lock nut around this spigot, which is also a custom machine piece that we've made. And then these lovely lids. So that's screen wash fill. The fill goes through this down into the tank in the footwell. It's actually an idea we came up with for Gordon's car, but we've used it on a couple of things since. So you get a big volume screen wash tank without having to have a massive tank in the engine bay. And then this one's the brake and clutch fluid reservoir over a level sensor on the side. And then this one is actually held on completely with the Union's the fluid comes out of, so they'll go through the holes we've already done in the bulkhead, and there'll be lock nuts on there. Thus, you don't see any visible fasteners on them in the engine bay. They just sit nicely at the back on the bulkhead. No visible fasteners, symmetrical, matching caps. They'll be engraved on the cap with what fluid goes in them. These will be vapor blasted and black anodized to match everything else in the engine bay. So another nice job by Jonathan at PBE CNC. Right, step this way. Now you're straight away going to notice a change in here. These banners on the wall here are to do with an exciting little project we've got going on. So long-time viewers will probably have heard me referencing Bruce Holder quite a lot. He's the guy who does most of our laser engraving work. Now for a while now he's been doing these kind of silhouette artworks, and I'm lucky enough to have been one of his first sort of commissioned customers, where he did my Celica, RA28 Celica, and it's basically laser cut wood that's laminated onto a black anodized backing. So he does these bespoke artworks. You can have your own car done, but what we thought we'd do is actually offer some sort of smaller versions of those artwork, which are basically laser etched black anodized panels with a little wooden holder, like a desk stand, of various projects of ours. So there's 5 in here, 3 next door. These banners represent the different designs that we've done so far. You can go into our web shop and buy one of those to have on your desk. So go and have a look, and it will probably make Bruce very happy if you buy one. And also, if you want a custom commission of your own car, get in touch with Bruce, Octane Legends, and he will be able to sort you out. So that is exciting. Looks nice in the workshop as well. Right, so that's that. Mark 1 Escort. I just showed you the reservoirs. Few prongs of attack on this. Fuel fillers one, so we're going to have a threaded fuel neck. That's going to be a machined billet part. Goes in from the inside, bolts on from the outside, and then that's going to be mated to a welded section of aluminium tube. So basically it'll be continuous all the way to the tank, and then there'll just be a single joiner onto the tank there. So they've done the model of the actual neck, done a 3D print prototype so we can just check the fit of that, and Jim's welded up the pipes, and now what we've got to do is just get that model sent away to be machined, and then when that gets here, weld it all up, and we'll be good to go. And there'll be a spigot on that for the vent pipe up here as well. Staying in the boot area, Anthony has been on the plates that blank off where the reservoir hoses for the rear struts go. So this is on essentially McPherson struts, if you like, but they're at the back, so it's not quite the same, but it's a strut, a coilover type strut down onto the lower arm, and they are remote reservoir dampers. And we thought on this it'd be nice to be able to access the adjustments easily, so not having the reservoirs underneath. Now some of the adjustment is made here, and there'll be removable panels over there. The other 2 adjustments are made on the reservoirs themselves. So what we decided to do was we've made some billet mounts that bolt into the boot floor and hold these vertically, and then we thought what we'd do is orientate them so the hose union is on the back, so you can't see the hoses, and then do some holes in the floor for where the hoses pass through to the struts themselves. But because we can't disconnect the pipes that go to the dampers themselves because they're pressurized, we need to be able to pass that whole reservoir through to actually install them. So what we did was, at metalwork phase, we planned out this technique where we'd have a big hole that could pass through, and then some bolt holes, and we'd do some plates that went in after, some closing plates. So that's what Anthony's done. He's basically designed a stainless steel plate that's got a round hole in it, but it's split completely in half, so you can then put the 2 sides of the plate together with a grommet around the hose. He's then made some little neoprene gaskets to seal from water or whatever coming in, and then they bolt in. So yeah, it's going to look really smart when we've got the billet sort of towers mounting those there, and then there'll be a trim panel in front of those. So you'll basically have kind of an upholstered boot area with just those 2 reservoirs with the adjusters on the top. Should look really smart. So that's that. Luke's been on with a few more things. Rear lights. We wanted to switch to bulb holders that basically weren't crusty old Mark 1 Escort bulb holders, and also ideally had like a decent connector onto them rather than just spade terminals. So we spec'd some, I think there's some British manufacturer, might be Land Rover I think actually, the bulb holders we've got. which have got like a nice readily available connector we can use to connect to them. And we were sort of umming and ahhing about whether to make our own rear light housings or not. They aren't otherwise available new, so we'd have to use the originals and kind of bead blast them and make them look nice. And we thought we might be able to just modify them slightly to use these different bulb holders, but they weren't really acceptable. So we've gone down the other route of actually modelling and machining, well certainly they will be machined, but modelling so far our rear lamp housings to take these modern bulb holders. So that's been 3D printed and trialled, looking really good. We've designed the bezels as well, so it'll be off-the-shelf lenses, our own billet bezel and back housing with a newly available bulb holder with that has a modern type connector going into it. So nice solution, looking good in that respect. There's also been on finishing the centre console design, and we've just done a quick folded mild steel version of it just to test fit it. That's looking pretty good. There might be a couple of small changes to do to account for the thickness of the carpet, but it's looking good. And then actually we've just put in the pedal box and steering column and wiper mech temporarily at the moment because Alex is in the latter stages of the wiring and just wanted to take into account every component when he's just finalising the shape of the wiring harness behind there. But I think he's hoping to button up the main section of the wiring harness today so we can actually get that in. And then there's a dual reason for getting that lot in, is because we also want to do a scan of the dash. Now, something I neglected, I think, to mention the other week was Tom making the dash pad for the top. So we've obviously got a modified dash structure, and on the top we've made an aluminium separate panel which will be clamped in place by the air vents, and that will be upholstered in Alcantara. Now that's been done, we'll clamp that in place, and then we're going to do a 3D scan of that area where the instrument cluster goes, the steering column as well, so we can do the model for the column shroud and also for the instrument cluster itself. And the instrument cluster itself is going to be used to sort of clamp down and finish off the edge of that dash pad where it goes, where it sits behind the instrument cluster. So we can crack on with the design work for that. I think that's probably covered most of where we're at on this. Oh yes, Jamie's very kindly reminded me, bonnet release handles. So I think we might have showed that the other week. We've got the billet machined bonnet release handles through that we've made. They pivot on a bronze bush with a shoulder bolt. James was just doing the cable arrangement for them. So we've got our custom made bonnet latch, got the handle in there. We'd planned the routing and drilled the hole in the shell when we were at metalwork for where the cable's going to go. So we just basically needed to get the cable in situ. James has then machined a little brass collar, if you like, that is how the cable anchors to the handle in the car. So it's held in place to the handle with a little through bolt, and then the cable wraps around the brass collar and crimps back onto itself, so that where it's anchored it's not got any sharp kinks or sort of stress points on it, because it's literally a round piece and then back onto itself. And that works really nicely. It's nice to feel the action of that, because obviously we've designed the latch itself, the spring in there and the handle, so it's sort of nervously wondering how the bonnet release will feel. But yes, it all seems good. I think he's just got a temporary bolt in at the minute while we waited for the shoulder bolt to arrive. But that's good. And then Anthony's actually been working on the last bit of the door glass area, which was the inner, what do you call them, waste seals, I suppose they are. Because we originally had the wrong clips. There's a couple of suppliers out there, they're actually advertising the inner clip, which is not the right part, and we didn't realise this when we ordered it, so I've just ordered the correct inner ones from a company that, this is actually useful information, if you're ever after trim clips and that sort of thing, there's a fantastic company called Bresco which do the vast majority of the clips that exist in terms of attaching bits of trim. So they do the exact original Ford type of clip for these, because they rather than just pushing onto the flange, they have a little tag on them that slots sideways into a square hole, but they are different on the outer to the inner, and they do both types. So useful contact, Bresco. Right, let's wander around this way, and I have to say, after several weeks of seemingly banging our heads against walls with a couple of problems on some of these cars, particularly the Morris and Land Cruiser, this week has suddenly been the weight lifted, because we've kind of resolved various problems. This one we had repeated problems with the power steering pressure relief valve sticking, and eventually went from using a reproduction aftermarket pump to a used genuine Ford pump, and this is a familiar story with the diff on this as well. And so far I went out in this yesterday, I think I did about 60 miles in it. No problems, to be honest, really happy mechanically, so I'm kind of calling that a mechanical sign off on this. Very shortly this will be going over to my detailing guy, who's going to start sprucing it up ready for the big final handover. So very exciting times. I've got to do the handbook for that as well, write the manual for the car essentially, so I might show you that when that's done. And then a Land Cruiser, which has had the dreaded engine squeak for a long while. Now, we mentioned this quite a long while ago, and it was we were mulling over whether it was something to do with the cam belt train. It sounded kind of like a belt squeak. We ran it without the auxiliary belt. Didn't solve it. Excuse me. Oh dear. And then we started thinking, well, maybe it's cam belt train, but we weren't totally convinced. And it seemed to be more in the sort of V top end area. It was moving around quite a lot, and it was like a chirp sound that was very hard to define, whether it was an air leak causing a slight chirpy whistle, or whether it was some sort of mechanical rotational noise. It was that kind of noise that was very hard to judge either way. So we kind of had to go through a process of elimination. Now we did actually find some problems. So the inlet manifold's in two halves, and quite a while ago, this was mentioned before, where I thought, well, maybe it's the O-ring that joins the two halves of the manifold. And we did discover that the bolts holding the two halves together were just fractionally too long, so they bottomed out without it being fully pulled up. And I thought, oh, that is exactly what it is, air squeaking past the O-ring on that. Resolved the problem, but it didn't solve the squeak. And then we started to think it could just be something to do with the cam belt, like squeaking against the side of one of the pulleys. So we just decided to run it for a while, but it didn't change at all, which was bizarre. Kind of put our brains back into it again. Definitely sounded like it was a top with the stethoscope. It was most noticeable around the cam pulleys. But it seemed to flitter around, and it came and went, which was odd, and it seemed to sort of be sometimes this side a bit, mostly this side, but you'd almost convince yourself it could be on all cylinders. So then we did the old brake cleaner spray test just to check for air leaks again, and found that there was a small air leak around one of the injector O-rings. And this was last week we mentioned this, and we were like, eureka, this is definitely it. It tallies up with all the symptoms. It's air squeaking around the injector seals. It kind of explains why it's moving around, and it all sounds like it's sort of in the V. So we drilled out the manifold bigger and used bigger O-rings and made them a slightly tighter fit. But to my absolute dismay, it didn't solve the problem. So there was a problem there, in that there was a small air leak on an injector, but it didn't solve the squeak problem when we'd done that. So then we had to put our heads back, into the game and think, oh, what on earth could it be? So we thought, well, go back to the cams. We'd already looked at the cams, checked all the cam caps, made sure there was oil feed there, made sure the condition of them looked fine, and that all looked great. But we went back to it again and thought, well, could it be the shims? So these are solid follower engines. So the way you set the valve clearances is the shim between the follower and the cam, and you grind them essentially to the right thickness to get the valve clearance that you want. And that had been done when we did the engine rebuild on this, and all the shims were spec'd and sent away to be ground at a place that normally grinds shims for us. But we noticed on looking at it that the grind finish was a little bit on the coarse side. And we wondered whether it could be that, and it kind of tallied up, because the shims are free to rotate on the follower and the grind marks were quite linear, and we thought, well, maybe when they go 90 degrees so the cam lobe is going across the grain of the grind marks, that could be squeaking on there, and then when it's linear with them it goes away, and that would it kind of tallies up with everything. It's why it would be loud in the cam pulleys, it's why it's moving around a lot, it's why it's coming and going. It kind of made sense. So we've just pulled the cams out yesterday and today and taken each shim out in turn. Gibbo's then basically linished it on a piece of glass with, I think, probably 800 grit or some sort of, maybe might even be 1500 grit wet and dry, to basically give them a finer, more polished finish without taking any substantial amount of material off. Refitted them all, and joy, oh joy, massive relief. That is exactly what it was, and that is the first time I've ever even heard of that issue. So I'm not sort of surprised or embarrassed that it took us this long to find it, but it's an interesting sort of every day's a school day thing that in future that'll be another thing in the arsenal of knowledge when we hear something similar. It could be that. So yes, it was the cam lobes making a noise on the shims according to the orientation of the grind marks on the shims. So yes, that is sorted. So the only other thing on this at the moment is that we previously talked about the fuel filler hose, and we were getting fuel smell in the car from the Mocal fuel filler hose, which had gone very soft and was obviously smelling. So we swapped that out for some OEM fuel filler hose, I think it's Land Rover stuff, and we've got the same thing. It's not as obvious, the hose hasn't gone as soft, but we're definitely getting some permeation of odour through it. So we spoke to ATL, because if you look at the available fuel filler hoses, most companies seem to sell more or less the same thing. Spoke to ATL and they said that yes, sure enough, there is a problem at the minute with E10 fuel permeating a lot because of the ethanol content through rubber fuel filler hoses, and there isn't an obvious solution, and basically a lot of the old type fuel filler hoses are getting fuel smell permeation, and basically the culmination of this advice was that if you get Viton lined hose you won't have a problem, but Viton lined fuel hose or big diameter fuel hose is not actually that common. Now Samco do a range, but they don't have any in stock and it's on a massive lead time. So another company, and off the top of my head the name has escaped me, I'll get the title put on, but another British manufacturer, very helpful, will do it to order. They're doing us a metre of Viton lined rubber fuel hose of the right diameter, and I hope, and they certainly think this will be the case, that will solve our problem on that. So just waiting for that to be made. We can get that in. In the meantime, Jim's making up some rubber mats, so we're just kind of ticking off a few of the loose ends. The seat belts arrived from Quick Fit Safety Belt Systems, who make seat belts for us when we need that job doing, or re-web existing seat belts for us. So they've made up the seat belts pretty much as a replica of how they were originally, just with some nice buckles and chrome fittings. They're ready to go in. Jim's just making up some rubber mats for the footwells. Just being quite utilitarian, we didn't want to go carpets and things, but it's nice to have something that just stops you scratching up the Raptor finish on the floor. You can easily take them out and wash them if you need them. So yeah, we're just rattling through some remaining little bits and bobs. Very relieved to have the squeak now resolved. I'm going to get some more miles on this, but I'm pretty confident with how that's going. So good news on that. And then I'll probably just briefly finish on the Stratos. Last week we mentioned we'd found a evaporator, a leak from the evaporator, or that's what I thought, because it was refrigerant coming out from the heater box area. So we've stripped that apart. We've had the evaporator out. There was indeed a pinhole on one of the pipes, if you like, that make up the matrix. Can't think of the correct word. So we've soldered that up, hoping it'll be all right. Obviously they do run out a lot of pressure, but I'm pretty confident with Nat's job on soldering that. Certainly worth it as an alternative to getting a replacement unit. So we're going to re-gas that. Hopefully that'll be fine, and if that goes well, then we can start getting all the interior back into this as well. And on that note, I think I'm going to end. So I'll see you next week. Head over to our shop on retropower.co.uk, have a look at Bruce's awesome artwork, and get yourself a mug and a hoodie. It's that time of year, unfortunately. Winter's coming, as they say. I'll see you next week.